But they're not prepared to accept peace at any price, and nor are the Muslims. Countless truces have collapsed in Bosnia, and the underlying fear is that still this one may do the same. Some observers, though, believe that recent intense fighting has already stretched troops to the limit. This and the cold weather may work in favour of peace. Robin Marriage, Sky News.
In Britain, opposition MPs are demanding an inquiry into a gas explosion which destroyed a house in Kent. Sean Hussey and his partner Donna Ratcliffe were staying with relatives in Sussex when they were told of the blast. Residents of 40 houses nearby were evacuated until Gas Board officials gave the all-clear. The explosion comes in the week British Gas announced a cutback of 90% in its budget for checking for leaks.
This was the scene after the dust had cleared. One house reduced to rubble, another damaged so badly it will have to be demolished. And two families, no doubt, counting their blessings that they weren't killed in the blast. The husband and wife who lived in this property were away on holiday. But the family living next door had an even luckier escape. John and Joan Bryant and their 23-year-old daughter Vanessa were all at home at the time of the explosion. They'd had the gas man out in the middle of the night after suspecting a leak, but he'd found nothing and gone away. Hours later, their home was wrecked.
I've never seen devastation on quite this scale. I can only think that whatever problem was brewing up over the Christmas period has culminated in such an event because of the house being unattended for all of that time.
So the possibility that the house was absolutely full of gas?
Well, certainly to the point where there was an explosive mixture to set off such an explosion seems likely at this stage.
Firemen spent hours removing the rubble piece by piece, making sure no one was trapped underneath. And everybody living nearby in the street was evacuated until there was no danger of another blast. The Shadow Consumer Minister, Nigel Griffiths, has demanded an immediate inquiry into the incident, which comes just days after the disclosure of a memo from British Gas revealing huge cuts in the budget for checking gas leaks. Sarah Yun, Sky News.
Another day of fighting in Chechnya has claimed more civilian lives as Russian troops continue to pound the capital, Grozny. Moscow has ignored a call for talks from the Chechen government, and the Russian Foreign Minister, Andrei Kozyrev, said force was the only solution. But there's growing international concern about Russia's tactics, which have claimed the lives of Chechen and Russian civilians. Sky's Linda Duffin reports from Grozny.
This is one of Moscow's strategic targets. An 8-year-old boy who died in agony in a makeshift hospital while his father sobbed helplessly at the bedside. It'd be hard to find a more innocent civilian than Aslan Bakayev. His 2-year-old sister Anna, being carried here on the right, was killed outright during the same attack on one of Grozny's eastern suburbs. Their mother cradles a surviving baby. These are the remains of the Russian rocket which killed the children. As the grieving family fled their home, another artillery attack rocked the street. They took refuge in a bomb shelter as the shelling continued, Aslan and Anna's mother numb with shock. There's fierce fighting on at least 3 fronts around the Chechen capital. Russian jets bombed rebel positions on Karpinsky Hill to the west, where a huge pall of black smoke marks the bombing of an oil installation. The Chechens say the blaze is dangerously close to an ammonia storage facility, threatening a major ecological disaster. To the south of the capital, Russian bombers were trying to destroy a strategically important river bridge. And to the east, heavy shelling from Russian artillery pounds Chechen positions at Kankala airfield. The two sides seem to have reached a kind of standoff. The Russians have taken one half of the airfield. The Chechens say they're still holding the other half, and they're determined not to give any more ground. The Russian advance is hampered by an apparent reluctance to commit ground troops. In hand-to-hand fighting, the lightly armed Chechens would have the advantage of being on home territory. For now, the Russians seem content to try to bomb and shell Grozny into submission. But Chechen defiance seems as strong as ever. At their headquarters opposite the presidential palace in Grozny, they were chipping away the old hammer and sickle insignia, which still to them symbolizes Moscow's domination of this tiny but rebellious republic. Linda Duffin, Sky News, Grozny.
Well, with us now in the studio, Charles Chikotwa, the Chechen representative here in Europe. A very good evening to you.
Good evening.
What does Dudayev want right now, then? We know that he wants a ceasefire, and he's put that to President Yeltsin, but what is his underlying plan?
This underlying plan, of course, is to have peace, that the Russian troops would be withdrawn from Chechen soil and discuss seriously about the future of Chechnya with Russia.
But we've seen quotes, of course, coming from Moscow this evening from President Yeltsin and from Andrei Kozyrev, and both seemed determined or reflect a very firm Russian determination to proceed with what's happening, particularly around Grozny. So it looks as if President Dudayev won't get what he wants.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because I would like to point out, originally, we tried to get the United Nations to mediate a peaceful solution for this conflict, and they said it was an eternal affair. And now that Russia has destroyed and made so many refugees, Russia has applied to the United Nations to help them with refugees, and they accepted. Wouldn't it have been better that the United Nations done something originally to have a peaceful solution?
Well, the international community has thrown up its hands in horror to a certain extent about the bombing of civilians in Grozny. But look at this quote this evening from the German Foreign Minister Klaus Kinkel. He's suggesting that Dudayev drove parliament out. He has suspended democratic structures. Mafia-style structures now prevail and control the land. That's the perception even in Germany.
Well, that's the Russia propaganda again. I mean, they love using. I mean, we're going back to all the problems in Russia. The Chechens' fault. I mean, that's absolutely
but surely
ridiculous.
even I mean, that is generally the view as well in Britain to a great extent and in America as well. Surely all the leaders of these countries aren't just simply accepting what's being fed to them by Russia.
All I can say that President Dudayev was elected democratically by his people.
And so you and all the people, in a general sense,
all the people and all the people are standing behind him now. How do you think he can hold a superpower at bay like that? Certainly not just with a few mafiosi people behind him, or gangsters or whatever you want to call them. No, these are the people.
All right, you're saying this evening that you have more figures on casualties coming from where, Helsinki?
They were given to me from Helsinki a report that there are 2,000 civilian casualties, 1,000 Russian soldiers, and 300 Chechen soldiers. And I think that's enormous, a lot of civilians when there's supposed to be supposedly selected bombing.
You must be happy to a certain extent about how this is being reported internally within Russia itself. I mean, several newspapers and broadcasting organizations seem to be, inverted commas, telling the truth and up against President Yeltsin.
That is correct, and that there we go back to the same thing, that the Russian people are against this war. The Russian people want a peaceful solution. It is Yeltsin and his warlords, his Security Council who are creating this affair, which in the end will bring down the Russian government, and unfortunately we're going to be in a new situation.
It seems to be the case, so just to bring you back to this, that the fact of the matter seems to be that Yeltsin and Kozyrev and the defense minister are going to get their way. It doesn't matter what the Russian people think.
Yes, I agree, but they won't get their way in the end. The Russian people will eventually throw them out. I mean, that's obvious what's going to happen. I mean, because of the international media and international government, people will come and get fed up with what Russia's doing, because Russia's violating human rights. All these are violation of human rights now.
Okay, what are you hearing about the refugee situation right now, then?
Well, all I can say is that the Russians who were living in Grozny, who had their homes destroyed, the Chechens in the mountains are taking them in. So, I mean, you can see how one side, the Russians are bombing their own people, and the other side, the Chechens are looking after them.
Do you think that the Russians will eventually then commit ground troops and tanks in a very big way to finally capture the capital?
No, I don't. I think they won't be able to, and I think it will come to an end before.
Isn't that an optimistic assessment?
Oh, you have to be optimistic. The Chechens are very optimistic.
All right, Charles Chikotwa, the Chechen representative in Europe, thanks very much for coming in and speaking to us on Sky tonight.
Thank you.
You're watching Sky News, and the people of the village of Kircubbin have been paying their last respects to two men who died in a boating accident. Christmas lights were switched off and shops were closed as the funerals were held of Jackie McNamara and Hugo McCulloch. Earlier, a third man, Ron Grant, was cremated in Belfast. The three died when their speedboat capsized after its engine failed during a trip across Strangford Lough. Two other men are still missing.
In the close-knit village of Kircubbin, everyone knows everyone else. And at religious services today, those who could turned out to mourn the 3 men whose bodies have been recovered and spur a prayer also for the 2 still missing, presumed drowned. For one man, the sole survivor of the speedboat tragedy, Stephen Martin, the grief perhaps weighed more heavily. The 6 friends had been on their way across Strangford Lough after leaving a pub on Skettrick Island on Tuesday night when the vessel overturned after engine failure. None was wearing a life jacket. The loss to families and the community is immeasurable.
In a small community like this, these men, young men in the prime of life, married to local girls, practically there's hardly a family in the community that hasn't had a close connection with them, and of course that's reflected in the great wave of sorrow and indeed of support that has followed this terrible tragedy.
The first victim to be buried was 36-year-old Jackie McNamara, whose widow is expecting their first child. An hour later at the same church, the same mourners, including many rescue and search teams and volunteers, attended the funeral of 30-year-old Hugo McCulloch. The ashes of 54-year-old Ron Grant from Lincolnshire, who was well known in the motorcycle world, will be scattered at Daytona racetrack in America.
With no expectations of finding the 2 missing men still alive, the search has been officially called off. The only hope now is that the sea will eventually give up its dead. Barbara McCann, Sky News, Kircubbin.
Well, the house siege in Greater Manchester is now in its 2nd day, and police say that they'll continue negotiating for as long as it takes. A man believed to be armed is holding a woman hostage in an upstairs bedroom. 6 streets have now been sealed off around the house in Wigan.
Heavily armed and 100 strong, the police waiting game continues for a 2nd day. Police confident their specially trained negotiators have now begun to build up a rapport with the gunman, but under no illusions of the danger hostage Gillian Spencer faces.
In view of his current discussions with the negotiators, then we have to look at his stability a little bit, but we do feel the situation should be taken quite seriously.
The siege began after Gillian Spencer's baby son Connor was found abandoned in his pram outside the house. Her father went to investigate and discovered she was being held at gunpoint in the bedroom by a former boyfriend. Police still don't know exactly what prompted the siege. So far, the gunman's only demands have been for food and cigarettes.
At the moment, he's quite calm, and he's discussing with the negotiators quite lucidly. She seems to be quite